Hi, this is Ilka Cassidy with Passive House Accelerator, and thanks for tuning in to this special bonus episode of the Passive House podcast, recorded at the Sustainability Symposium 24 in Philadelphia. This episode is all about row houses. In 3 interviews, we will discuss the Passive Row House Manual, a new construction Passive House row house in Philadelphia, and the retrofit of a passive row house compound in Baltimore. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Ilka. Nice to see you here at the Sustainability Symposium. Yeah, I'm Paul Thompson at BluPath Design. I'm a Passive House architect. We design Passive House certified and Passive House adjacent and Passive House performance projects, both as consultants and architects.
And you've been member of the Passive House group first, and now GBU, and you're one of the big contributors of the row house, the Passive House row house manual.
That's right. That was a fun project. That's right. It was in the initial group of the GPPHA, Greater Philadelphia Passive House Association, which then morphed into the Passive House community as part of Green Building United. And one of our first major projects was to work on the issue of, like, what do you do about the ubiquitous row home situation, and what can we contribute to make it Passive House be affordable and achievable in all the row homes that are in our old cities, like in Philadelphia.
Yeah, let's talk about row homes, because Philadelphia has the most row homes basically in the country, followed by Baltimore.
Right. I understand it's something like 417,000.
Yeah, 70% of the building stock in Philadelphia are row homes, and 60% of that is older than 50 years. So there's a huge market and huge need to renovate those, and that was recognized, of course, by the Passive House Group, or GBU. So what the group wanted to do is to educate people how to renovate these row homes to a really high standard, possibly Passive House. But even if you don't go all the way to certification, how do you do it? What's in the manual? What can people read in there?
Oh, well, you can not only read, but we have begun a continuation of the manual project, which is to do some videos based on the chapters in the manual. But what you'll find in the manual is, I believe there's 10 or 12 chapters on what sort of windows, what do you do about mechanical systems. Most mechanical systems in passive houses are all electric. There are various types of hot water heaters that are all electric. How do you make an old building airtight? And that's one of the 5 basic tenets of passive house performance. Not only passive house performance, but also good building science. And that was really one of the goals of the manual, was to make sure that we were applying good building science to have durable and healthy row homes, because there are a lot of row homes in Philadelphia that are not, well, they're durable because they've been around for a while, because they were built of materials like stone and brick, but they're not necessarily healthy. And so having energy efficient, healthy, good indoor air quality, comfortable row homes was a real mission of the group that was putting the manual together.
Well, and you're talking from experience, because you have actually renovated a Passive House or a row house to Passive House standard. And what's really interesting about row houses here in Philadelphia is that they come in all kinds of different sizes and shapes, and maybe not shapes, because the shape is pretty similar.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and they're all attached on both sides, but the size varies drastically. So the smallest row house here in Philadelphia is basically the Trinity, which is 1 room per floor.
That's right.
And it adds up to, I don't know, maybe 800 square feet?
They're very, very tiny. Yeah. There are many types of row homes, but all with that basic idea that you're sharing walls. And so you end up with a party wall condition, which I find very interesting, both as a building science issue, right? You have this adiabatic wall condition where there's no heat transfer between these walls. You still want to have an airtight connection, because I'm not particularly interested in smelling the last night's meal from our neighbors or listening to the sounds coming through the wall. But so the airtight construction. One of the particularly on smaller row homes, adding insulation is a real issue. Like, how do you insulate that thermal envelope well? You don't need to have thermal insulation on the party walls, but you need to have it at the front and rear. And then there's if you live in a historic district, many row homes are in historic districts. The brick is one of the finishes that makes a beautiful walkable city like Philadelphia. It gives it its character. And so you want to keep the brick. You mentioned the row home that my partner and I renovated. We have a four apartment unit, 4-story row home near the Rittenhouse Square.
Which was built as a single family.
That's right. In 1845, it was built as a single family home. It was a big house, right? So they would be rooms for both family members and servants. In 1924 was the first major renovation, and that's where our unit was broken into 3 residential apartments and then an office space, which might have been like a doctor space, on the first floor. The building was slightly enlarged towards the rear. Another floor was put on the back, and the main stair was reconfigured. And it wasn't until about 9 years ago, that we decided that it was time for another major renovation. So, looking at, it was 75 years to the first major renovation, and it's 100 years to this recent renovation where we are renovating it to Passive House and Passive House Performance.
So overall, it turned out to be a very successful project for you as a building owner, because now you can rent out, maybe not certified Passive House apartments, but very close to it, which has been very popular for your to get renters, I understand.
We have found that we are finding that there are generally younger people who are interested, and I think that the energy efficiency and the general notion of sustainability has sort of invaded the popular culture, particularly on young folks. They're enthusiastic. They're appreciative of the work that we have done and the kind of the systems that we've set up to help them live sustainable lives and to have the benefits of energy efficiency. They appreciate the ERVs with the fresh filtered air. They appreciate one of the great benefits living in the city is the acoustic comfort. Right, those triple pane windows are nice and quiet, and so we don't hear the traffic on Pine Street, and we don't hear the trash trucks very much on the alley behind.
Yeah. So going back to the manual, did you use the manual to inform your renovation, or was it the other way around? Did you use your case study to implement a lot of what you learned in the row house manual?
I think it's both. We both learned from the manual, and we learned from the construction and brought it to the manual. One of the things that the contributions that we made to the manual was to look at evaluating properties as to whether they are reasonable properties that could be renovated to Passive House. And so we took our own experience as owning a building. How do you know, or how do you evaluate whether your row home is a good candidate to renovate to Passive House or to Passive House Performance? You could be in a historic home. You could be in a place where zoning may dictate some of the things that you could do. You might have a house that just had a new roof and a new hot water heater. Now, are you going to want to remove the roof and put one with more insulation? So there's many issues that might have one house be a better candidate than another. And it becomes, a lot of it is, it's very site specific, just like passive house performance is climate specific. The availability and the ability to renovate buildings to passive house is very site and house specific.
And the manual actually helps you decide that as well.
That's right. The manual gives some guidance as to here's some of the things to think about, or that you either can think about before you start the design process, or maybe can help you if you're looking for a property and think you want to design to passive house. Here are some of the issues that you could think about that will affect the ease or maybe even the availability of passive house as a certification or performance.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm Lauren Thomsen, principal of Lauren Thomsen Design.
And I am Matt Gindlesparger, technical director at Lauren Thomsen Design.
We do a variety of work, but often it is urban in nature. We are based in Center City, Philadelphia, and a lot of our work is in an attached row condition, single-family homes. We do a lot of work in a historic context, so we're constantly kind of navigating buildings with lengthy histories of many generations of, renovation or, many lifetimes, we could say. Lots of history. But we also do some new construction. There are plenty of infill lots in Philadelphia. And the project we just presented on was one of those.
If we are looking at new build, a lot of the new build lots in Center City are row house lots. So you are dealing with certain conditions. You have one or two houses on either side. What did that mean for your project?
One thing I want to touch on, and then I'll let you jump in, but it's an interesting vestige of the urban planning of the city. We are this city is still kind of dominated in our projects by the smaller footprint that was necessary when heating and cooling was simply not available. And so it's really fascinating to, in the 21st century, continue to abide by those dimensional standards. And so the row house typology is, extremely narrow, typically 14 to 16 or 18 feet wide max, and is bounded on two sides by another building often, which makes daylighting a challenge, which makes the deep footprint a challenge, and it's really a specific typology. That said, it's really fun to operate within that level of constraint, to kind of see what can be done to address the specific site context. It also makes the orientation of the building and the street, which you have no control over, of utmost importance, and kind of learning how to provide comfortable interiors which have daylight and window access for interior spaces is that's always a challenge for us with that.
Yeah, and those are already like just general design challenges. Yeah. And then you put passive house on top of that.
Absolutely. We do everything we possibly can to make the most use out of every single opportunity that the fixed given oriented site presents to us. From that move, then there's further constraint in the already narrow lots that we're talking about. We're talking about building big, thick assemblies that are highly insulated to sort of enclose. So again, another sort of, carving away at opportunistic space within the living zone. But those are the constraints that we have. And there's no shying away from hard work and figuring out what the sort of best possible solution we can come up with that is functional for what a particular client needs and wants. B is performative and sort of meeting the sort of goals that we're working towards. But C, the space has to be beautiful, incredibly nice to live in, inside and out. We don't want to sacrifice a well-designed space for, we don't want to always sacrifice that for the sort of most energy efficient thing. There has to be a middle ground.
So going back to Passive House principles, I mean, we just said that just inherently row houses are very energy efficient because they have adiabatic walls on two sides and are only exposed in the front and the back and very narrow lots. So there's not a lot of heat loss, really. So that's a good thing. But if you go back to Passive House principles, first thing is like orientation.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you're kind of stuck.
Out the window.
There's no way you can actually orient the way, or you don't have any say in how the building is going to be oriented.
Sure.
The other thing is that because you only have a very narrow exposure to the outside envelope, you also don't have a lot of space for windows. Right. So all your heat gains are out the window too.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So how did you go about those constraints?
Well, in our particular case, we were a little bit lucky in that one of our sort of party wall sides was directly adjoining a park space, an open space. So while we weren't able to fully fenestrate that particular side because it is still a lot line, we were able to make selective sort of massing manipulations and kind of carve into what would be our maximum available envelope. And the trade-off for that is we were able to get some windows in some open space, and they happened to be in a southerly orientation, which was beneficial to us. The sort of execution and modeling of the space and also the daylight of the space would have been very, very different in that home had we not made those moves. So we traded off some additional complexity and some loss of square footage towards the end of bringing in daylight and also some solar gain, which was very necessary.
Yeah. And then I guess starting with modeling or energy modeling for FIA certification, that posed some challenges too, because a row house is not necessarily something that everyone in the United States really knows or deals with. So it wasn't necessarily part of the FIA's modeling protocol. Yeah. What were the challenges there?
Well, particularly around the sort of calculation of overall surface area, exterior wall surface area. With the party wall, in our case, we just had one party wall. That, yes, is an adiabatic condition, but we had to sort of account for that as part of the sort of exterior envelope. And that, from our perspective, that sort of skewed our targets that we had to meet in a consequential way. We had to meet those targets because at the time we didn't have much leverage to be able to sort of opt out, or we could have done what we originally wanted to, but we would have lost the certification. We'd still have a great house, but we wouldn't have been able to certify. We did have to make some trade-offs relative to that was a moment where we added an extra inch of insulation on the exterior envelope. In this case, we got a little bit lucky in that the added inch that we needed happened to be the only sort of insulation that was available at the time. This was peak COVID times where material supply was very short, and there just happened to be a truckload of 4-inch mineral wool available, and that's exactly what we needed.
Yeah, so it's very interesting looking at it from the energy modeling and certification perspective, because I think so far a lot of times the way personally I have gotten around not having to certify individual row homes is that you can combine them.
Sure.
And then make it a big, basically multi-unit, multi-family complex and model it that way, and then it works again.
Right.
So,
right.
But you don't always have that opportunity here in Philadelphia, because most of the time you have one.
Single owner occupancy, single owner ownership. Yeah,
exactly.
It's going to make that a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's so pertinent because we are increasingly becoming more urban.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
people are moving to cities.
Yeah.
And it's not somewhere where, you know, we want to lose out on the opportunity to encourage people to certify and to meet those goals.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So it's super relevant.
Yeah. So, and I do know that, you know, we all worked on convincing FIAs that this is a very important building typology here in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Wilmington, and things in terms of modeling have to change. And the FIA's guidebook has changed.
Yep.
So what you can do now is, as part of modeling a single row house, you can actually use those adiabatic walls. You still model them as walls with the same conditions on either side, but in terms of finding your targets, you can count them as exterior envelope surface.
Yep.
So, and that's a big game changer, and I'm really glad that FIAS did that.
Yeah, it's helping currently on a project we're working on. Helping currently with a project we're working on.
That's
in the
great.
office.
That's great to hear. So then moving into construction. So we have the pre-certification. You did all the architecture work. You designed a very, very beautiful row house, and now it went into construction. So, and a row house poses very specific challenges there as well. What were they?
I would say challenges that we were aware of. There were also challenges that we were not aware of, but ones that we were aware of going into the project were that of logistics and really kind of it related to the constrained dimensions of the site. We are on a 9-foot wide cobblestone street that is dead ends at the top and bottom of the block into 2 other 9-foot wide cobblestone streets that run perpendicular to kind of more larger vehicular thoroughfare, kind of more typical right-of-ways. And we knew from the beginning, or I think there was actually challenges in getting a foundation contractor who would agree to do the work, because you can't get a concrete truck down the street. So there was that type of kind of known challenges, but then there were also, I think, unknown challenges, such as when we excavated, the neighbor to the north had actually their footing was well into our property. Their building was 4 inches onto our property line, and so and I said in the presentation, 4 inches really makes a difference when your whole property is only 216 inches wide. So those kind of changes require a project team that is really nimble and really collaborative and able to work together during construction to adapt the plan, to kind of recenter, revise details, maintain steadfast kind of toward the goal of certification and performance, but to be able to kind of revise as required due to these unknown conditions, which is, I think, equally as relevant in these retrofit projects.
That sort of contractor relationship and the sort of communication necessary to kind of execute a project exists no matter the complexity. But when we're talking about executing details that are, critical to air sealing or continuity of insulation, it's so important that you have a contractor that is committed to executing and committed to working through the detailing of things, be able to sort of see far enough into the future in terms of kind of sequencing that has an understanding of what needs to go when. Obviously, our documentation doesn't prescribe when to do what. But hopefully there's a clarity with the detailing and documentation that allows them to sort of work through and communicate that down the line. We should mention that in our case for this building, the contractor Scribe Design Build was absolutely incredible to work with. They read through all of our documents very, very carefully. They brought up questions where there needed to be questions, and were never cautious about picking up the phone to, get us out there to figure something out.
Yeah, so what's really interesting about what you just described in general is that it's almost sounded more like a retrofit than a new build. Right? Being nimble and being having to react to things that come up, because you have also party walls on the sides,
Yes.
right? So, and that come with party walls, and I think you described that in your presentation. There's so many different even assembly types.
Yes.
Yep.
And can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. And this goes back to that move that I mentioned early about kind of carving away at massing. We're losing square footage, but gaining fenestration. Well, we're also, increasing the complexity, because we're turning volumetrically. We're turning a wall through two 90-degree turns. We're turning a foundation wall to an exterior wall to a roof assembly, and then back to a wall assembly, all while maintaining air sealing, waterproofing, continuous insulation, with a varied number of products. And again, we have to work through the marriage of all these products, not just for getting them in place, but making sure that they stay in place, and making sure that everything is constructed in a way that is going to be durable, long-lasting, and hopefully this is a construction type that is going to last 100 years, just like the masonry that is also the sort of normal typology of row homes.
Yeah.
I just want to add, I think it requires rigor on the part of the architect also to really understand, to have a good enough understanding of the building assemblies to understand how they will be constructed, and to do some quality assurance, so to speak, in terms of the detailing of the job.
Yeah. And I talked to Paul Thompson a little bit earlier about the Passive House Row House manual. Is that a resource that you used before or during your design process?
Yeah, I think we have referred to that. We've also passed that along to clients, which I think is really wonderful. I think it can be a daunting challenge, because when you begin to renovate, the project grows, right? When you start, or if you choose to do a retrofit that with the goal of passive house certification, it's a major project, and you are really almost building new within the masonry shell. And so when as architects, a lot of what we're doing is educating our clients on the process, and on the steps that are needed, both high level and detail, to successfully complete the project and achieve the goals that we all set out to achieve at the beginning. That for us in particular has been really nice. It's also a nice sounding board, and I think in general we're so lucky in Philadelphia. We have such a great community of architects that we work with who are very collaborative. We could bounce ideas off of, that we feel really grateful for that. And we know Paul well, and Laura. I think that is an example of that kind of collaborative spirit in the city.
Yeah, Ilka, when I was initially modeling for this house and came across that little adiabatic wall issue, you were on the list of a couple, 3 or 4 other people that I kind of like set off as a sounding board. I think I sent that email 4 or 5 times.
I remember that email, yes.
And, we hadn't met in person before, but, we definitely spoke a similar language, and have a shared language of experience, that it's so rich in this community. It really is a fantastic place to be able to practice.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is GBU and the symposium, because we get to meet in person eventually. And I think I totally agree. It's a great community. And thank you for all the great work that you do.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm David Gavin. I'm an associate at Quinn Evans Architects in Baltimore, and I'm an architect and certified passive house consultant, and I've been doing this kind of work for over 10 years now.
I'm Justin Iovenitti. I work at New Ecology in the Baltimore office. We are a nonprofit, mission-driven, and focusing on affordable housing, mainly do sustainability consulting, energy audits, etc. I'm also an architect, although that's not what I do now. I guess it kind of informs some of what I do, but primarily for this project we're going to discuss, I was the FIAS verifier along with my coworker Alex.
Yeah, my name is Norm Horn. I'm a construction project manager with New Ecology, and I'm based in our Wilmington, Delaware office. I work with builders, designers, and developers on building what's typically their first high-performing projects. And we do a lot of work with existing row homes and infill row homes in the city of Wilmington and the state of Delaware.
Great. So let's talk about row homes. What's special about them and what is challenging?
Well, I think what we've heard a lot of at the Sustainability Symposium so far today is a sense of place. And I think anyone who is from any of these mid-Atlantic cities, whether it be Philadelphia or Baltimore or Wilmington, a row house is sort of what you picture when you think of sort of the street fabric of the city. It's row houses make for a nice, dense urban fabric. I think Philadelphia and Baltimore have some of the densest home ownership in all the United States. And so I think people look upon them, in sort of a quaint kind of fashion. It feels like home to people from these areas. And, they want to see that history and that fabric sort of preserved in the cities in which they live.
Yeah, I think the home ownership is a huge point because row houses come in all different sizes and in all different areas. So there is a price point that is all over the charts, basically. Mm-hmm. So home ownership is something that is also really important if you think about renovations, because people are investing into their properties. So again, a very good point for renovating to high sustainability standard or energy performance standard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of them are still standing 100 plus years later. I mean, quite frankly, when they were built, this was, worker housing, modest for people of modest means. The houses are not large, but they've been durable, and they're also not particularly efficient when they were built. But on the flip side, there is some economy to having a lot of shared walls. So when you're only dealing with front or rear side walls that are exposed to the elements, you can make a pretty efficient building without too much effort. Obviously, it's not super easy dealing with 100-year-old fabric, but there's less exterior envelope than in a freestanding home.
Yeah, and what's also really interesting, and I've lived in a row house, pretty small row house in Philadelphia. The way they were built is that they always built them in like 2s or 3s. So there's no firewall in between each of the row houses. So once you peek through the drywall on your ceiling, you actually look into the attic of the neighboring house. So that's definitely something that you need to know before you try to tackle a row house renovation, that is something that can happen. But that's something that you did not necessarily have to deal with your project, because you basically combined 4 row houses to make it a compound. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the compound was a little unique in that, like you said, we started out with 4 existing row houses and combined them into 2 individual spaces. We also had the benefit there of also densifying those properties as well. They started out as 2-story rows, and in order to achieve the compound's goal of getting as many artists into their property as they could, we added a 3rd story on, and then we also added a rear addition as well. So in the end, we ended up with a fair bit of new construction that was sort of able to handle a lot of that high performance envelope that passive house requires. But we were still able to maintain the fabric of the row house. It still maintained its street presence.
So how did home ownership work on that project?
So the compound they're actually an artist collective that is centered in the East Baltimore Midway neighborhood. And they started out just sort of as a collective in a single factory building. And over time, as they expanded and grew, they acquired more and more properties. And so these 4 row houses were part of that complex. And essentially, those were the last 4 kind of undeveloped properties that they have to date. And so while this isn't a home ownership model, there's sort of a shared ownership of all of it. So while, yes, they're renting individual spaces to different artists, they all sort of have a stake in the property.
So what was the biggest challenge in terms of passive house renovation of that is very row home specific?
I think, definitely the air leakage target, dealing with existing masonry walls, which obviously are not are airtight, in varying states of not disrepair but deterioration. So just getting those stable, getting them parged, getting an air barrier applied to the interior side, that was really key because we need to be able to safely add insulation and do it inboard on the interior side because we don't want to change basically the appearance from the exterior. In some cases that might be a perfectly acceptable approach, and I know there are folks doing it in New York City and other places, but it's just for this project we had to focus on the interior. So yeah, I think the air leakage was the biggest thing, and just making sure it's continuous between all the different levels down to the below grade slab, tying into the roof, all the windows and doors. That's always probably the biggest challenge.
And then from a modeling perspective, did you look at those 4 homes as individual units, or did you combine them to one? Energy modeling perspective.
Right. It is a single project as FIAS considers it. So for the Passive House certification, it's a single multifamily building. It's a little odd because the Baltimore City considers it 2 buildings, 2 kind of single family buildings, right? So it's weird. And Energy Star, which is a prerequisite to getting Passive House certification, also considers it single family. So we've kind of like bridging between 2 single family homes in one sense, and then the single multifamily Passive House, the 2 buildings combined. That's how it was modeled.
Mm-hmm. And then Norm, you help people build to Passive House standard or close to Passive House standard. So you're basically the support on site. What do you encounter? Like, what are the challenges there in general and maybe specific to row homes?
I think Justin made a really solid point about the amount of effort that goes into establishing a good air barrier in existing masonry buildings, because it's a lot of area, requires a lot of attention to detail, and it's something that many people, if this is their first time, they just haven't paid attention to it before. I mean, we see projects all the time where they're pretty far along and you can see daylight straight through the outside wall around a window opening or at two junctions of assemblies. And when you point that out, someone says, "Well, that's just how we do it." So that's a big hurdle to overcome. And one thing that as a builder I really appreciate about the project that these guys worked on the compound is the level of craft and attention to detail that came from the drawings and was implemented on site. I mean, it's the kind of thing that should be in a textbook.
I want to give a shout out to Norm and just what folks like him are trying to do in elevating the workforce, getting more familiar with these passive house principles, or just in general high performance principles. It's definitely the enclosure, the air barrier, but it's also even like mechanical trades, plumbing trades, electrical trades are all interfacing with the air barrier, the building enclosure, wherever the thermal barrier is, and trying to educate them, make them understand the importance of keeping that continuous, sealing up their work, their penetrations is like really key. And it's only through demonstration, education, repeated experiences will we get the overall level of work elevated to a place where it needs to be.